Millionaire crime lord marries obese woman as a bet and is surprised when... Hey there, I'm Alex, your guide through today's extraordinary tale on Hearts of Crime. What you're about to witness is a story of passion and danger that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, when I say the twist at the end will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy these forbidden love stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads of these incredible stories. Stay with me until the very end. I promise the conclusion will shock you in ways you can't imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your family. Nolan the Shark. Murray wasn't a man who showed mercy. Not in business, not in his underground operations, and certainly not when it came to the bets he made with his inner circle. You're joking, right? Nolan leaned back in his leather chair, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. His penthouse suite overlooked the glittering city lights, a kingdom he'd built through equal parts business acumen and ruthless tactics that most people wouldn't dare mention aloud. Dead serious, replied Carlo, his right-hand man whose loyalty had been bought years ago with money that could have purchased a small island. Double your entire casino earnings for a month if you can pull it off. The other men around the table chuckled, their expensive suits and watches catching the dim light. These were men who gambled with millions the way others bet pocket change. Marriage. For at least 6 months, Carlo continued, his smile stretching across his face, to someone who would never normally catch your eye. Nolan's steel-grey eyes narrowed. At 40-something, with a chiseled jawline, a physique maintained by private trainers, and wealth that attracted supermodels and actresses to his bed without effort, the idea seemed absurd. It was intuitive that Nolan couldn't get married. It was that he'd never wanted to. Marriage meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant weakness. What is the catch? Nolan asked, his voice carrying the quiet danger that made even hardened criminals think twice before crossing him. Oliver, the youngest of his circle, pulled out his phone. I've got the perfect candidate. Melanie Wright works at the community center downtown. The photograph that appeared on the screen made the men burst into laughter. Nolan didn't join them. He studied the image of a woman who must have weighed over 300 pounds. Yet despite her size, she had a pretty face, with kind eyes and a warm smile that seemed genuine. Not exactly your usual arm candy, is she? Carlo taunted. Nolan set down his glass with a controlled movement that silenced the room. You think I can convince her to marry me? That is not the challenge, Carlo replied. The challenge is staying married for 6 months, living together, being seen in public. A real marriage, Nolan, not just a paper arrangement. The silence stretched as Nolan considered it. His pride wouldn't let him back down. Besides, 6 months was nothing. He'd endured far worse for far longer. Double my casino earnings for a month, Nolan repeated. That's over 40 million. Consider it done, Carlo said, extending his hand. Nolan looked at the hand, then back at the phone displaying Melanie Wright's image. I want it in writing, and when I win, I want everyone to know you lost. The men nodded, knowing that Nolan never made idle threats. Deal, Nolan said, his handshake sealing a fate that would change more lives than he could possibly imagine. Melanie Wright's morning routine never varied. She up at 5:30 a.m., struggle into exercise clothes that never seemed to get any looser despite her efforts. 30 minutes on the second-hand treadmill that groaned under her weight, then shower and dress for work. By 7:15, she was at the Riverside Community Center, preparing for the day's programs. As the center's program director, Melanie oversaw everything from children's after-school activities to senior citizens' art classes. The pay was terrible, but the work filled her heart in ways that food once had. Morning, Mel, called Teresa, the center's receptionist and Melanie's closest friend. You were not going to believe who called asking about our adult literacy program. The mayor finally responding to our funding requests, Melanie joked, setting down her oversized purse and the healthy lunch she'd de-packed, but would probably replace with something more satisfying from the diner across the street. Better. Goldcrest Enterprises. They re-sending someone today to discuss a potential partnership. Melanie raised her eyebrows. Goldcrest was one of the largest companies in the city, known for luxury hotels, high-end retail developments, and exclusive casinos. Why would they care about us? Thais, maybe they are trying to improve their image. Who cares? They've got money and we need it. The day proceeded like any other, until 3 p.m., when the glass doors of the community center swung open and conversation throughout the lobby came to a halt. Nolan Murray walked in like he owned the place, because in a way he did. His custom suit probably cost more than the center's monthly budget. Behind him stood Carlo, and two men whose bulges under their jackets weren't fooling anyone. "I am looking for Melanie Wright," Nolan announced, his voice carrying across the room without needing to shout. Teresa's mouth hung open as she pointed mutely toward Melanie, who was helping a young boy with his math homework. Melanie looked up, confused by the sudden silence. When she saw the small entourage approaching, she instinctively stood, feeling immediately self-conscious about how the movement caused her body to jiggle in ways she hated. "Ms. Wright?" Nolan extended his hand, his expression revealing nothing. "Yes," she replied, wiping her suddenly damp palm on her skirt before accepting his handshake. "How can I help you?" "Nolan Murray, CEO of Goldcrest. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership with your center, perhaps somewhere private." Melanie nodded, still bewildered, and led him to her tiny office. The space felt even smaller with Nolan's commanding presence filling it. Carlo and the security men waited outside, but their presence loomed like shadows. "I'll be direct, Miss Wright," Nolan said once the door closed. "I've been looking for community initiatives to support, and your center's work has caught my attention." "Really?" Melanie couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "How exactly did you hear about us?" A ghost of a smile touched Nolan's lips. "I make it my business to know about everything in this city." For the next 30 minutes, Nolan asked detailed questions about the center's programs, funding needs, and long-term goals. Melanie, initially guarded, found herself warming to the conversation. Despite his intimidating appearance, Nolan listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. "You're passionate about this place," he observed during a pause. "These people need someone to be passionate for them," she replied simply. Something flickered in Nolan's eyes, respect perhaps, or recognition of a quality he rarely encountered. "I'd like to continue this discussion," he said, standing to leave. "Perhaps over dinner?" Melanie froze. "Dinner? Tonight, 8 o'clock. I'll send a car." It wasn't a question, and before Melanie could formulate a response, Nolan handed her a business card with a number scrawled on the back. "My private line, in case you have questions before then." He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving Melanie staring at the card and wondering what had just happened. Teresa burst into the office the moment Nolan and his entourage departed. Was that the Nolan Murray, the hotel and casino guy? What did he want? "Apparently to take me to dinner," Melanie replied, still dazed. Teresa's eyes widened. "Like a date?" "No, of course not," Melanie said quickly. It's about funding for the center. But as she said it, she couldn't help remembering the intensity in Nolan's gaze when he looked at her, not at her size, but at her, and wondering if there might be something more to his sudden interest. That evening, as Melanie stood before her closet, discarding outfit after outfit that either didn't fit or made her look like she was trying too hard, she told herself repeatedly that this was just business, that a man like Nolan Murray would never see past her weight to the woman beneath. The sleek black car arrived precisely at 7:30. The driver, a stoic man in a dark suit, didn't react when Melanie emerged from her modest apartment building in the only decent dress she owned, a dark blue wrap style that skimmed over her curves rather than emphasizing them. "Mr. Murray is looking forward to your company, Ms. Wright," the driver said, opening the door for her. As the car slipped into traffic, heading toward the exclusive downtown district where she rarely ventured, Melanie tried to calm her racing heart. She was just a community center director, meeting with a potential donor, she reminded herself. Nothing more. But deep inside, in a place she rarely acknowledged, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. The kind of hope that had been crushed so many times before, that its reappearance now felt like both a betrayal and a miracle. Little did she know that across town, Nolan Murray was making preparations of his own. Preparations that had nothing to do with funding a community center and everything to do with winning a bet that would change both their lives forever. The restaurant was exactly what Melanie had expected, exclusive, elegant, and intimidating. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables, spaced far enough apart to ensure private conversations remained private. The maitre d' took one look at Nolan and immediately led them to what was clearly the best table in the house. Every eye in the restaurant followed them, or more specifically, followed the unlikely pairing of the city's most eligible bachelor and the heavy-set woman in a simple blue dress who walked beside him. Melanie felt their stares like physical touches, her cheeks burning with awareness. "Ignore them," Nolan said quietly as he pulled out her chair. "They were not worth your attention." Melanie nodded gratefully, though she couldn't help noticing how easily Nolan dismissed the opinions of others. Must be nice, she thought, to move through the world with such confidence. "I've taken the liberty of ordering a selection of the chef's specialties," Nolan informed her once they were seated. "Unless you have dietary restrictions?" "No," Melanie replied, trying not to think about how people always assumed that overweight meant constantly dieting. "That sounds lovely." As the meal progressed, Melanie found herself gradually relaxing. Nolan proved to be an engaging dinner companion, with knowledge that extended far beyond business. He asked thoughtful questions about her work, listening intently to her answers without the condescension she often encountered from wealthy donors. "Why the community center?" he asked as they shared a dessert, a decadent chocolate creation that Melanie would normally never allow herself in public. "With your education, you could be working in corporate social responsibility for twice the pay." Melanie considered her answer carefully. "I wanted to make a direct impact. In corporate work, there are too many layers between the decision-makers and the people being helped." She hesitated, then added, "And to be honest, the corporate world hasn't always been welcoming to people who look like me." Nolan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Their loss," he said simply, and the conversation moved on. By the time the car dropped her at her apartment building, Melanie's head was spinning. Not from the wine she barely touched, but from the surreal evening. Even stranger was Nolan's parting comment. "I'd like to see you again, Melanie. Tomorrow night." Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't sound either too eager or too dismissive, he continued, "My foundation is hosting a charity gala. I need someone intelligent by my side who understands community needs better than I do." "I don't have anything to wear to a gala," she blurted out, immediately regretting the admission. Nolan smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Leave that to me. My assistant will contact you tomorrow." True to his word, a delivery arrived at the community center the following morning, a garment bag containing an evening gown in deep emerald that complemented Melanie's fair skin and auburn hair perfectly. More surprisingly, it was in her size, not too tight, not too loose, but designed to flatter her curves rather than hide them. Accompanying the dress was a note. "A car will pick you up at 7. Bring yourself, I'll handle the rest." Teresa practically squealed when she saw the dress. "He's interested in you, Mel. This isn't tea about the center at all." "Don't be ridiculous," Melanie protested, though her heart raced at the possibility. Men like Nolan Murray don't date women like me. "Maybe he was different," Teresa suggested. Melanie shook her head. "Nobody is that different." So across town in his penthouse office, Nolan was reviewing the final details for the evening's gala when Carlo entered without knocking. "How's the wife hunt going?" Carlo asked, dropping into a chair without invitation. Nolan kept his expression neutral. "On schedule." "You realize you've been seen in public with her already. People are talking." "People always talk," Nolan replied dismissively. Carlo leaned forward. "You understand the terms, right? This has to be marriage, Nolan, not just a few dates to humor us." "I understand perfectly." Nolan turned back to his computer, effectively dismissing his so-called friend. After Carlo left, Nolan sat back and considered his next moves. The bet had seemed straightforward enough at first. Marry Melanie Wright, endure 6 months of marriage, collect his winnings, and arrange a generous divorce settlement that would ensure her silence afterward. Simple, clean, profitable. So why did the plan suddenly feel hollow? Nolan prided himself on reading people. It was how he survived and thrived in both legitimate business and his other enterprises. And what he read in Melanie Wright was unexpected. There was no artifice there, no angle being played. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, her straightforward passion for helping others was refreshing. He pushed the thought aside. This was business, not pleasure. The fact that he'd found her company unexpectedly enjoyable was irrelevant. The gala was being held at Nolan's flagship hotel in a ballroom that looked like something from a fairy tale. Melanie felt like an imposter as she entered on Nolan's arm, acutely aware of how she must appear to the city's elite who filled the room. "Stop thinking whatever you were thinking," Nolan murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "You look beautiful." Melanie glanced up at him, startled by the compliment. "I mean it," he continued. "That color brings out your eyes." Before she could respond, they were approached by an older couple, the man silver-haired and distinguished, the woman elegantly preserved through what was clearly excellent plastic surgery. "Nolan, darling," the woman purred, air-kissing near his cheek before turning curious eyes to Melanie. "Aaron, you going to introduce us to your friend?" "Dorothy Richard, this is Melanie Wright. She runs the Riverside Community Center, one of the recipients of tonight's fundraising." Melanie extended her hand, grateful for the way Nolan had framed her presence as professional rather than personal. "How charitable of you," Dorothy remarked, her smile not reaching her eyes. As the evening progressed, Melanie found herself repeatedly defending her center's work to wealthy donors who seemed more interested in tax deductions than actual results. To her surprise, Nolan consistently steered conversations to highlight her expertise, deferring to her on questions about community needs with genuine respect. "You're good at this," he commented during a rare, quiet moment. "Good at what?" "Making people care about things they normally ignore." He studied her face. "It's a rare talent." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Later, as they danced, Melanie initially protesting that she didn't dance, Nolan insisting that with the right partner anyone could, she found herself wondering what was really happening between them. "Why me, Nolan?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could reconsider it. "Why am I really here?" His steps didn't falter, but something shifted in his expression. "What do you mean? You could have anyone in this room on your arm. Women who fit better into your world. I am not stupid. I know how this looks." Nolan guided her into a quiet corner of the ballroom, his hand still at her waist. For a long moment he said nothing, and Melanie feared she'd overstepped. "Most people see what they expect to see," he finally said. "They look at me and see money, power, connections. They look at you and see—" "A fat woman," Melanie supplied when he paused. "Someone who doesn't belong in their narrow definition of this world," he corrected firmly. "I see someone who's built something meaningful without the advantages Ivy had. It's interesting to me." It wasn't a declaration of attraction, but it was honest, or at least it seemed honest. Melanie wanted to believe him. The moment was interrupted by Oliver, the youngest of Nolan's inner circle, who approached with a smirk that immediately put Melanie on edge. "Nolan," Oliver nodded, then turned to Melanie with exaggerated courtesy. "And Ms. Wright. Enjoying your Cinderella evening?" "Oliver," Nolan's voice carried a warning edge. "Did you need something?" "Just wondering how our little wager is progressing," Oliver replied, his eyes never leaving Melanie's face. "You know the bet about—" "That's enough!" Nolan cut him off sharply, his hand tightening on Melanie's waist. But it was too late. The word bet hung in the air between them, and Melanie felt a cold dread creeping through her veins. "What bet?" she asked quietly. Oliver's smile widened. "Oh, she doesn't know. How interesting." Nolan's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Oliver, walk away. Now." Something in his tone made Oliver retreat, though his smug expression remained. "What bet, Nolan?" Melanie repeated, stepping back from his touch. The silence between them stretched, filled with the ambient sounds of the gala continuing around them, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in their corner. "Not here," Nolan finally said. "Let me explain somewhere private." "No." Melanie E.'s voice was stronger than she felt. "Tell me now, or I am leaving." Nolan ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, the first sign of genuine discomfort she'd seen from him. "It is not what you think." "You don't know what I think," she countered. "Just tell me the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, and Melanie thought she saw regret in his eyes before his expression shuttered. "There was a bet," he admitted, his voice low. "Us about whether I could—" He stopped, perhaps realizing there was no way to phrase it that wouldn't sound terrible. But Melanie didn't need him to finish. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity: the sudden interest in her community center, the expensive dress, the compliments and attention from a man who normally wouldn't look twice at someone like her. "Whether you could what? Get the fat girl to fall for you?" Her voice trembled with humiliation and anger. Was the community center funding even real, or was that just a convenient way to approach me? "The funding is real," Nolan said quickly. "That part wasn't a lie, but everything else was. It wasn't a question." She turned to leave, dignity the only thing she had left to salvage from this debacle. "Melanie, wait." Nolan caught her arm gently. "Please, it started as something unworthy. I admit that, but it is not the same now." "What is it now, then?" she challenged, tears threatening despite her best efforts. Before he could answer, a commotion near the ballroom entrance drew everyone's attention. Men in dark suits, not hotel security, but something more official, were entering, scanning the crowd with purpose. Nolan's posture changed instantly, tension replacing the vulnerable openness of moments before. "We need to leave. Now." "What? Why? What's happening?" "Federal agents," he said grimly, "and they re-looking for me. The revelation should have been shocking, but somehow it wasn't. Of course, a man like Nolan Murray had secrets darker than a callous bet about a woman's affections." "This has nothing to do with me," Melanie said, pulling away. "I am going home. It is not safe." Nolan's voice was urgent now. "Anyone seen with me tonight will be questioned. Trust me, you do not want that." "Trust you?" Melanie laughed bitterly. "After what you just admitted?" Nolan glanced toward the advancing agents, calculating. "I deserve that, but right now we need to move. I'll explain everything later, I promise." Against her better judgment, Melanie allowed him to guide her toward a service entrance. As they slipped through the kitchen and down a back corridor, she wondered how her life had taken such a dramatic turn in just a few days. Outside, a car was already waiting. Not the chauffeured luxury vehicle that had brought them, but something sleeker and less conspicuous. Nolan opened the door for her, his expression grim. "Where are we going?" she asked, as he slid into the driver's seat. "Somewhere safe," was his only reply as the car pulled away from the hotel, leaving behind the glittering world that had never really been meant for Melanie in the first place. The city lights blurred as they drove, Nolan navigating with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where hidden routes and blind spots in surveillance might be. For nearly 30 minutes, they drove in silence. Melanie's thoughts cycling between outrage at the bet, fear about the federal agents, and confusion about why she was still with this man who had humiliated her. Finally, they pulled into an underground garage beneath an unassuming apartment building in a middle-class neighborhood, not where she would have expected someone like Nolan to have property. "One of my safe houses," he explained, leading her to a private elevator that required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. "No one knows about this place except my most trusted people." The apartment was surprisingly modest, comfortable but not lavish, with clean lines and practical furnishings. It looked lived in, though not recently. "You should be safe here tonight," Nolan said, moving to what appeared to be a well-stocked bar. "Drink? I think you owe me answers before alcohol," Melanie replied, remaining standing despite her exhaustion. Nolan nodded, pouring himself a generous measure of something amber. "Fair enough. What do you want to know first? The bet or the feds?" "Start with the bet. What exactly were the terms?" He took a long swallow before answering. That I could get you to marry me within a month and stay married for 6 months. Melanie felt the blood drain from her face. Marry you? Are you serious? The stakes were high, he said, as if that explained everything. And what would you get out of this farce? About $40 million. The casual way he named the amount, a sum Melanie couldn't even fathom, only underscored the vast gulf between their worlds. And the federal agents? What do they want with you? Nolan's expression darkened. They've been building a case against some of my business associates for years. I've kept my hands clean mostly, but they think I'm the key to bringing down bigger players. Are you? Melanie asked bluntly. He met her gaze steadily. I know things that would interest them, yes. So you're what, some kind of criminal? I prefer to think of myself as a businessman who occasionally operates in grey areas. Melanie laughed incredulously. This isn't funny, Nolan. Those men looked very serious, and now I'm... What, harbouring a fugitive? You are not harbouring anyone. This place is clean, legally purchased through a legitimate corporation. And I'm not a fugitive. They didn't have a warrant for my arrest, just questions I'd rather not answer tonight. He set down his glass and approached her slowly, as one might a skittish animal. I know this is a lot to process. The bet was cruel and beneath me. I regretted it almost immediately, but I didn't know how to tell you without losing your chance at 40 million? Melanie supplied bitterly. Without hurting you, he corrected softly. So you didn't deserve to be caught up in my mistakes. And yet here I am. She gestured to the apartment, hidden away in your safe house, while federal agents look for you. How did this become my life? Nolan had no answer for that. Melanie moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights. I should go home. Not tonight, Nolan said firmly. It is not safe. They will have people watching your apartment. Because of you. Yes, the simple admission hung in the air between them. You can have the bedroom, Nolan offered after a moment. I'll take the couch. Melanie nodded, too emotionally exhausted to argue. As she closed the bedroom door behind her, she leaned against it, trying to make sense of the evening's revelations. The man who had wined and dined her, who had made her feel beautiful and valued for the first time in years, had only approached her because of a bet about marriage of all things. And now somehow she was hiding from federal agents in his secret apartment. It was all too much. In the living room, Nolan poured himself another drink and considered his options. The feds showing up wasn't a tea entirely unexpected. He'd known they were closing in. But the timing couldn't have been worse, and Oliver's deliberate revelation of the bet. Nolan wasn't a man accustomed to guilt, but seeing the hurt in Melanie's eyes had affected him in ways he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a cruel wager had somehow evolved into something else, something he couldn't quite name, but wasn't willing to lose. The question was, had he already lost it? And more importantly, was Melanie Wright, a woman he barely knew but was coming to respect more than most people in his life, worth the risk of staying when every instinct told him to run? Morning would bring decisions neither of them was prepared to make. But for now, separated by a door and the consequences of Nolan's choices, both wondered if there was any path forward from the chaos they now found themselves in. Melanie woke to the unfamiliar sounds of someone moving quietly in another room. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before the previous evening. Events came rushing back: the gala, the bet, the federal agents, the escape to Nolan's safe house. She glanced at her phone, several missed calls from Teresa, who had undoubtedly heard about the dramatic interruption of the gala. With a sigh, Melanie texted her friend a brief message. I am safe, will explain later. After using the adjoining bathroom to freshen up as best she could in yesterday's makeup and borrowed pajamas, Nolan had thoughtfully left some clean clothes outside the bedroom door. She steeled herself and walked into the main living area. Nolan stood at the kitchen counter, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. He looked different, more approachable somehow, though the tension in his shoulders remained. Coffee, he offered, sliding a mug across the counter. Melanie accepted it wordlessly, taking a sip before asking, What happens now? Nolan leaned against the counter. That depends partly on you. Me? I am not the one running from federal agents. No, he acknowledged. But you re-involved now, whether either of us wanted that or not. Melanie considered this. Can I just go home and pretend none of this happened? You could, Nolan replied carefully. But they'll question you, and depending on what they ask and how you answer, it could be complicated. Are you asking me to lie for you? No, he said firmly. I would never ask that of you. In fact, he continued, reaching for a folder on the counter, I've been making arrangements while you slept. He slid the folder toward her. Inside were documents, legal papers, contact information, and what appeared to be bank statements. What is this? Oyster protection, Nolan explained. I've transferred $5 million to an account in your name. Before you object, he added, seeing her expression, it's clean money from legitimate businesses. The lawyer whose card is in there has been briefed. If the feds pressure you, he'll represent you. The community center will receive the funding I promised, regardless of what happens next. Melanie stared at him in disbelief. You think you can just pay me off after everything? It is not a payoff, he countered. It is insurance for you. I dragged you into this mess. The least I can do is make sure you come out of it unscathed. And what about you? Where will you be while I am dealing with the fallout? Nolan's expression turned grim. I have options, places I can go until things cool down. You rerunning, she stated flatly. I prefer to think of it as a strategic retreat. The reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just about a humiliating bet anymore. This was about criminal investigations, possible arrests, and a man preparing to disappear. What did you do, Nolan, really? He was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. My family wasn't always wealthy, and he finally said. My father worked for people who operated outside the law. When he died owing them money, they came to collect from me instead. I was young, desperate. I did what I had to do to survive. And now? Now I run legitimate businesses, but I've never fully severed those old ties. The feds after me. They after the people above me. People who would consider my cooperation a death sentence. The stark admission hung in the air between them. So you caught in the middle, Melanie said quietly. Something like that. Nolan's gaze met hers, more honest than she had ever seen it. I'm not a good man, Melanie. The bet proves that. But I'm not the monster they think I am either. Melanie traced the rim of her coffee mug, thinking, what about Carlo and the others, your friends who made the bet? Nolan's laugh was hollow. Friends is a generous term. They are business associates who enjoy the perks of my success. And right now they are probably distancing themselves as quickly as possible. So you alone. He didn't to deny it. Melanie set down her mug decisively. But take me home, I need time to think. It was not safe yet. I can't make any decisions hiding in your secret apartment, Nolan. I need to be in my own space. I need normality. After a moment of consideration, he nodded. I can arrange for a car, not one that can be traced to me. The ride to Melanie's apartment was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. When the nondescript sedan pulled up outside her building, Nolan handed her a burner phone. My number is programmed in. If you need anything at all, call it as secure. Melanie took it, their fingers brushing briefly. What will you do? Lay low. Consult with my lawyers. Consider my options. He hesitated. I never meant for any of this to touch you, Melanie. Yet here we are. She opened the car door, then paused. For what it is worth, I hope you find a way through this. His smile was tinged with regret. Take care of yourself. As Melanie watched the car pull away, she wondered if she'd ever see Nolan Murray again, and was surprised to find the thought pained her more than it should have. The federal agents arrived at her door the next morning, just as Nolan had predicted. There were two of them, Agent Phillips, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, and Agent Reyes, younger and more approachable. Why don't we just have a few questions about your relationship with Nolan Murray, Agent Phillips explained, once they were seated in Melanie's small living room. We barely have a relationship, Melanie replied truthfully. We've only known each other for a few days. The agents exchanged glances. You were seen leaving the gala with him right before our team arrived, Agent Reyes noted. That seems like more than barely a relationship. Melanie sighed. He was interested in funding the community center where I work. We had dinner once and he invited me to the gala. When your people showed up, he seemed concerned. He offered to take me home. And did he? Take you home? Melanie hesitated, the lawyer S-card burning a hole in her pocket. Not immediately, she admitted. He was upset. We drove around while he calmed down, then he arranged for a car to bring me home. Do you know where he is now? No. So it wasn't to lie. She had the burner phone, but she had no idea where Nolan had gone after dropping her off. The questions continued for another hour, about Nolan's businesses, his associates, his behavior at the gala. Melanie answered as honestly as she could, without revealing the existence of the safe house or the money he'd given her. When they finally left, with warnings that they might return with more questions, Melanie collapsed onto her couch, emotionally drained. The burner phone sat on her coffee table untouched. She should hate Nolan for what he'd done, for the bet, for dragging her into his criminal connections. Yet something held her back. Perhaps it was the genuine regret she'd seen in his eyes, or the way he'd tried to protect her even as his own world was crumbling. Or perhaps it was the uncomfortable realization that, despite everything, she'd felt more alive in the few days she'd known him than she had in years. A week passed with no word from Nolan. The community center received a generous donation from Goldcrest Enterprises, exactly as promised. Teresa peppered Melanie with questions about the gala and the mysterious federal agents, but Melanie kept her answers vague. Life returned to a semblance of normality, though Melanie found herself constantly checking the news for mentions of Nolan Murray. There were a few articles about federal investigations into casino operations, but nothing specifically naming him. The burner phone remained silent, until, 10 days after the gala, it rang in the middle of the night. Melanie? Nolan's voice was rough, strained. I'm sorry to call so late. Are you okay? She asked, immediately concerned despite herself. Not exactly. He paused. I need a favor, a big one. Melanie sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What kind of favor? I need someplace to stay for a night or two, someplace they wanna look for me. They re-watching my apartment, Nolan. The agents have been back twice. I know. That is why I need to meet you somewhere else. The community center, maybe? Melanie hesitated. Helping him could put her in legal jeopardy, but the urgency in his voice. Why should I help you, Nolan? After the bet, after everything. The line was silent for so long she thought he might have hung up. You shouldn't he finally said. You have every reason to tell me to go to hell, but I'm asking anyway because... Another pause. Because you are the only person I trust right now. The admission, so clearly difficult for him, made her decision. There is a storage room at the back of the center. I'll meet you there in an hour. Nolan looked terrible. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, with several days' worth of stubble and dark circles under his eyes. A poorly concealed bruise discolored his jaw. What happened? Melanie asked, locking the storage room door behind her. One of my associates decided I was a liability, he replied grimly. Tried to ensure I couldn't talk to the feds. Are you hurt anywhere else? He shook his head. Nothing serious. I've had worse. Melanie studied him, noting the exhaustion in his posture. You can stay at my place, and she decided. The agents don't watch at night and we can use the service entrance. It's too risky. It as that or the storage closet, Nolan. Your choice. He looked around at the cramped, dusty space and nodded. Your place it is. They slipped out the back of the community center and took a roundabout path to Melanie's apartment building, avoiding the main entrance as she suggested. Once inside her apartment, Nolan seemed to deflate, the careful control he maintained even in crisis finally slipping. When is the last time you ate? Melanie asked, noting how his clothes hung more loosely than before. I don't remember. She heated soup and made sandwiches, setting them before him without ceremony. He ate mechanically, like someone who knew they needed sustenance but took no joy in it. You should shower, she said when he finished. There are clean towels in the bathroom. While Nolan showered, Melanie made up the couch with sheets and a spare pillow. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her. She was harboring a man who had tried to make her the subject of a cruel bet, a man with criminal connections serious enough to attract federal attention. Yet watching him emerge from the bathroom, hair damp and wearing borrowed sweatpants that were too short and too wide, she saw something beyond the powerful businessman or the criminal associate. She saw a man who was, for perhaps the first time in his life, truly vulnerable. "Why did you call me?" she asked as he sat heavily on the makeshift bed. "You must have other options, other places." Nolan rubbed a hand over his face. "I told you the truth. You were the only one I trust right now. Because I have no connection to your world. Because you see me," he said simply. "Not the money or the power or what I can do for you. Just me. Even the ugly parts." The admission hung in the quiet apartment, more intimate than any physical touch could have been. "Get some rest," Melanie said softly. "We can talk in the morning." But sleep eluded her as she lay in her own bed, thinking about the man on her couch and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. A bet made in cruel arrogance had led to this moment of raw honesty and reluctant trust. Morning brought clarity for them both. Over coffee, Nolan outlined what had happened since they'd last seen each other. "The feds are closing in on several operations I am connected to. My former associates think I might cooperate to save myself, so they were trying to either scare me into silence or eliminate me entirely." He gestured to the bruise on his jaw. "That was just a warning shot." "What are you going to do?" Nolan met her gaze directly. "I am turning myself in." Melanie nearly dropped her mug. "What?" "I have been negotiating through my lawyer. I'll provide information on certain operations in exchange for immunity and witness protection." "Our witness protection," Melanie repeated slowly. "You will have to disappear, start over somewhere new." "Yes." The finality in his voice made her heart clench unexpectedly. "When?" "Today. My lawyer is making the final arrangements now." Melanie set down her coffee, processing this information. "So you came here to say goodbye?" "Partly," he admitted, "and partly because I needed somewhere safe for one last night. Somewhere I could think clearly about what I am about to do." "Are you sure about this? It sounds dangerous." Nolan's smile was wry. "Staying would be more dangerous at this point, and at time I face the consequences of my choices." "That is surprisingly mature of you." "I've had some perspective shifts recently," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Met someone who made me question a lot of things." The implication wasn't lost on Melanie, but she wasn't ready to address it. "What about your businesses, your life here?" "Most of my legitimate assets will be seized initially, then released back to me gradually. Once I've fulfilled my part of the deal, I'll have enough to start over." He hesitated. "The money I gave you is still yours. It asks in a separate account the feds don't know about." "I haven't touched it," Melanie admitted. "It didn't feel right." "Shall I use it for the community center then?" Nolan suggested. "Do something good with it." A thought occurred to her. "The bet, what happens with that?" Nolan laughed, though there was little humor in it. "I think recent developments render it null and void. Besides, Carlo and the others are scrambling to distance themselves from me. The money's the least of their concerns right now." They lapsed into silence, the ticking of Melanie's kitchen clock marking the passage of their remaining time together. "I never actually apologized," Nolan said suddenly, "for the bet. It was cruel and thoughtless, and you deserved better." "Yes, I did," Melanie agreed, "but in a strange way I am almost grateful for it. If not for that bet, our paths would never have crossed." "And would that have been so bad?" he asked quietly. Melanie considered the question. "I don't know, but I do know that meeting you changed something in me, made me see myself differently." "How so?" "You looked at me, really looked at me, in a way no one has in a long time, not with pity or dismissal because of my size, but with actual interest. Even if it started as a bet, there were moments that felt real." Nolan reached across the table and took her hand. They were real. That is what scared me the most. The admission hung between them, full of possibilities that circumstances would never allow them to explore. Nolan's phone buzzed. A text message. "My lawyer," he explained after checking it. "It's time." Melanie nodded, fighting an unexpected surge of emotion. "Will I ever see you again?" "It is unlikely," he answered honestly. "New identity, new location? That's how witness protection works." "Right." She forced a smile. "Well, it has been an adventure, Nolan Murray." He stood, gathering the few possessions he had with him. At the door, he turned back to her. "It wasn't just about seeing you differently, Melanie. You saw me differently too, not as a wallet or a connection or a target, just as a man with all his flaws. That's rare in my world." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, gently, briefly, a gesture that spoke of possibilities rather than passion. Take care of yourself," he said as he pulled away, and then he was gone. 6 months later, Melanie stood in the newly renovated community center, admiring the expanded facilities that the anonymous donation had made possible. The media attention following Nolan Murray's disappearance had eventually died down. The official story was that he had fled the country to avoid prosecution, though rumors persisted about his cooperation with federal authorities. The community center had thrived in the aftermath. With proper funding, they de-expanded their programs, hired additional staff, and even opened a small health clinic for neighborhood residents. Melanie had lost weight, not dramatically, but steadily, as she channeled her energy into making the center everything she always envisioned. She still thought about Nolan often, wondering where he was, who he had become, whether he ever thought of her. The answer came unexpectedly, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A package arrived at the center addressed to her personally. Inside was a simple wooden carving of a shark, Nolan's old nickname, and a note with just 3 words, "Worth the bet." No return address, no signature, but she knew. Somewhere in a new life with a new name, Nolan Murray had found a way to let her know he was okay. That the brief connection they shared, born from a cruel wager but transformed into something genuine, had meant something to him too. Melanie placed the wooden shark on her desk, smiling at the private joke. Life had returned to normal, or rather, to a new normal that included the memory of an unlikely connection that had changed them both. She never expected to see him again. The realities of witness protection made that virtually impossible, but sometimes, like today, she felt his presence in her life, in the renovated center, in the confidence she found, in the way she learned to see herself through someone else's eyes. The bet that had been meant to humiliate her had instead set her free in ways neither of them could have anticipated, and somewhere she liked to think Nolan Murray, whatever his name might be now, was finding his own kind of freedom too. A year passed, then 2. The community center continued to flourish under Melanie's direction, becoming a model for similar programs across the city. She dated occasionally, but never found a connection that matched the intensity of those few days with Nolan. On the 3rd anniversary of the gala, where everything had fallen apart, Melanie traveled to a small coastal town for a conference on community development. After her presentation, she decided to take a walk along the shore before returning to her hotel. The beach was nearly empty in the fading light, just a few figures in the distance. One of them, a man with a dog, was walking toward her. Something in his gait, the set of his shoulders, made her heart skip. It couldn't be. The odds were astronomical. But as he drew closer, the dog bounding ahead to greet her, she knew. His hair was different, his clothes casual rather than designer, but the eyes were the same, those steel-grey eyes that had once looked at her with surprising honesty. "Beautiful evening for a walk," he said, when they were just a few feet apart, his voice carefully neutral, though his eyes told a different story. "It is," she agreed, playing along. "I am just visiting for a conference." "Community development," he nodded. "I attended your presentation. It was impressive." The dog circled them, tail wagging enthusiastically. "Friendly dog," Melanie commented. "She's a good judge of character," he replied with a small smile. "Her name, Chance." The significance wasn't lost on Melanie. Appropriate. They stood in silence for a moment, the waves providing a gentle soundtrack to the reunion neither had expected. "How have you been?" he finally asked, the question encompassing far more than the simple words suggested. "Good," she answered honestly. "Really good, and you, are you?" Happy here. He looked out at the ocean, considering. Getting there. It's a quieter life than I am used to, but that's not a bad thing. His gaze returned to her. Ivy had a lot of time to think about the choices Ivy made, the people Ivy hurt. And the bets you've made, she added with a tentative smile. His answering smile was warmer than she remembered. Especially those. Though Ivy come to believe I actually won that particular wager, just not in the way I expected. The double meaning hung between them, an acknowledgement of what might have been. Would you like to get coffee? He asked. Catch up properly? Melanie hesitated, knowing that reconnecting with him could complicate both their lives. His new identity was a secret that had to be protected. Her life was back in the city, with the center and the community she'd built there. But some chances were worth taking. I'd like that, she said simply. As they walked together toward the small beachside cafe, chance running ahead of them, neither knew what the future might hold. But they had both learned, through the strange twist of fate that had brought them together and then apart, that life's most meaningful connections often came from the most unlikely beginnings. Sometimes, a bet made for all the wrong reasons could lead to something genuine. Sometimes, two people from different worlds could see each other more clearly than anyone else ever had. And sometimes, against all odds, they could find each other again, not through careful planning or grand gestures, but through the simple chance encounter that gave them both an opportunity for the new beginning they didn't know they were seeking. Wow, I told you that ending would be unexpected. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and share your reactions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Hearts of Crime for more captivating stories, just like this one every single day. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible tale of love in the criminal underworld. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you in the next video.